The thing about being the family scapegoat is that you don't even realize you're wearing the target until the arrows are already sticking out of your back. You just grow up believing that the world, and specifically your home, is inherently reactive to your presence, that chaos follows you like a shadow you can't outrun, and that disappointment is the only currency you have to offer. Stop scrolling for a second, because if you've ever felt like your existence was just a series of unfortunate events that only happened because you were there, then this is the truth you need to hear about what it's like when the scales finally, violently tip. For 25 years, I lived in the shadow of my brother Ryan. Ryan, the golden child, the effortlessly brilliant one, the sibling who could walk into a room holding a broken vase, and somehow, magically, the pieces would reassemble themselves and the blame would land squarely on me for even owning the rug it broke on. It started small, of course, the kind of subtle injustices that, when viewed individually, look like standard sibling rivalry, but when stacked over decades, reveal a profound structural injustice. I remember when I was about 8 and Ryan was 10. We had this sprawling, slightly neglected vegetable garden in the backyard, my dad's pride and joy, even though he only tended to it on Sundays. One Saturday, Ryan decided to practice his baseball swing using the biggest zucchini as a tee. The result was predictable. Zucchini mulch scattered across the tomato patch, several snapped bean poles, and a baseball bat abandoned near the wreckage. When Dad walked outside that evening, his face went gray. Before he could even articulate his shock, Mom was there, preempting the investigation. She looked at the scene, looked at Ryan, whose eyes were already watering on cue, and then she fixed her gaze on me, standing 10 feet away, holding a comic book. "Matthew," she said, her voice laced with that weary disappointment that felt heavier than any shout. "What did you do?" I remember trying to explain, trying to stammer out the truth, pointing at the bat, but Ryan was already weeping softly, a masterful performance of being shocked by the destruction. Mom put her arm around him instantly. "Don't cry, honey," she whispered into his hair. "It's okay. Matthew, you know better than to play ball near the garden." If you wanted to destroy things, why couldn't you just use your own room? I was grounded for a week. Ryan got ice cream and a new comic book, purchased by Dad to make up for the distress he suffered witnessing the aftermath of my destructive behavior. This wasn't just about a zucchini. This was the foundational brick being laid. It taught me that my testimony was worthless, my defense was invisible, and my default state was guilty. This pattern became the air we breathed. If the internet bill was astronomically high, it was my excessive gaming, even though Ryan was streaming 4K movies 20 hours a day. If the car had a dent, it was surely from me backing out carelessly, even though Ryan had driven it to a party the night before. And the cruelest part was the subtle, corrosive nature of my parents' belief. It wasn't malicious in the sense of actively wanting to hurt me. It was lazy parenting built on the easiest explanation. Ryan was good, Ryan was successful. Ryan never caused trouble. Therefore, any trouble that arose must logically be attributed to the only other available variable, me. I was the dark cloud, the liability, the one who needed correction, who needed to learn the hard lessons. I started internalizing it. I truly believed I was clumsy, careless, and perhaps fundamentally flawed. The psychological impact of being constantly blamed is that you stop defending yourself because the defense is never heard, and you start looking for evidence of your own failure. You fulfill the prophecy. If they think I'm going to mess up, I might as well just mess up, right? It was a vicious, self-perpetuating cycle of negative affirmation. My silence wasn't sullen defiance. It was a surrender to an established, irreversible family narrative. As we got older, the incidents grew more serious, moving from minor household damage to genuine relational damage. When I was 16, I had saved up every dime from my part-time job bussing tables to buy a beat-up Ford Escort. It was ugly, but it was mine. Ryan, at 18, had the newer, flashier car, but he always wanted mine for specific low-key trips where he didn't want his car recognized. I always said no, knowing instinctively that if anything happened, it would land on me. One Friday night, Ryan needed my car. He promised he would fill the tank, return it before midnight, and park it perfectly. I stupidly relented, tired of the incessant pleading and the ensuing guilt trip from Mom about not supporting your brother. At 3 a.m., the phone rang. It was the police. My car had been found wrapped around a light pole 3 towns over. Ryan wasn't hurt, thankfully, but he was gone. He'd bolted from the scene. The police called my parents. When my parents finally dragged themselves into my room, faces pale, the smell of fear thick in the air, there was no inquiry. "Matthew, how could you be so irresponsible?" Dad asked, his voice shaking not from anger, but from a terrifying weariness. "Driving recklessly at 3 in the morning? Leaving the scene? We thought you were asleep." I sat bolt upright. "Dad, it wasn't me." "I lent it to Ryan. He needed it." Mom cut me off with a sharp, chilling sound of disgust. "Stop lying, Matthew. Just stop. We know you did this. You're always making poor choices, always pushing boundaries. Ryan is in his room. He's been here all night." They had coordinated the lie instantaneously. They had protected Ryan without even asking him, without even checking. They simply knew, based on 2 decades of accumulated prejudice, that I was the one who screwed up, and Ryan was the one who was safe in his bed. The insurance nightmare, the police report, the total loss of my savings, it all fell on me. I spent the next year working double shifts to pay off the towing and impound fees, constantly hearing lectures about my recklessness and my inability to handle responsibility. Ryan never said a word. He looked at me sometimes across the dinner table, and there was a flicker in his eye. Not shame, not pity, but something colder, like recognition. He knew my life was paying for his freedom. And my parents were the willing enforcers. That's when the silence truly cemented. I stopped fighting. I became the walking acceptance of their low expectations. Years bled into adulthood. I moved 5 states away the day I turned 22, putting physical distance between myself and the suffocating narrative they had woven. I built a life, a stable, quiet life, where I was praised for my competence at work, where my friends trusted my judgment, and where my successes were attributed to my effort, not random luck. But that internal narrative, the voice that echoed Mom's disappointment, was hard to silence. Every time I received a compliment, a little voice whispered, "They just haven't seen the real you yet." Wait until you inevitably screw this up. Ryan, meanwhile, stayed close to home. He was successful in the way parents dream. High-paying job, engaged to a lovely woman named Sarah, and perpetually the recipient of family praise. Whenever I visited for holidays, the dynamic snapped immediately back into place. I was the slightly awkward visitor, the one who didn't call enough, the one who still carried the burden of the past car crash and the zucchini genocide. The realization, the shattering moment of truth, didn't happen in a fit of rage or during a dramatic courtroom reveal. It happened quietly, sickeningly, in the clinical light of a hospital waiting room. Dad had a sudden heart attack. It wasn't immediately fatal, but it was serious enough that Mom and Ryan were terrified, hovering near the surgical wing. I flew in immediately. We were all sitting there, exhausted, the tension between us a heavy, suffocating blanket. Mom was clutching a paper cup of stale coffee. "This is just awful," she kept repeating, her voice thin. "Just awful. I just wish your father didn't have all this stress." She looked over at Ryan, her expression tender. Then her eyes settled on me. "You know, Matthew, your father was so worried about your finances recently. He was talking about how he had to cover that shortfall again. It's just too much pressure for him at his age." The accusation, completely unfounded, slipped out like a reflex. I hadn't asked for financial help in years, but in their minds I was the eternal drain, the one who always needed to be bailed out, even if the current crisis was their own invention. I didn't argue. I simply inhaled and sighed, a sound of resignation. Ryan, however, shifted uncomfortably. He looked genuinely ill, pale under the fluorescent lights. "Mom," Ryan started, his voice a gravelly whisper. "Stop it." Mom frowned, genuinely confused. "Stop what, honey? We just need to pray he pulls through." "Stop blaming Matt for everything," Ryan insisted, louder this time. His hands were gripping the arms of the chair so tightly his knuckles were white. "Just stop it." Mom's face hardened immediately. "Ryan, we are in a crisis."
This is not the time to be dramatic. Matthew knows he creates stress. It's just a fact. That phrase, "it's just a fact," was the hammer blow. It encapsulated everything. Their belief wasn't based on evidence. It was an axiomatic truth of the universe. I was the source of all problems. Ryan stood up, pacing 2 steps and turning back, agitated. "You still bring up the car wreck, don't you?" 25 years later, you still talk about how Matt wrecked his escort. "Well, he did," Mom snapped. Ryan let out a harsh, unbelievable laugh. It was a sound full of pain and self-loathing. "No, Mom, I did. I took his car, I was drunk, and I wrapped it around that pole on Route 17. I ran away because I was terrified of losing my scholarship and going to jail." "And the minute you told me you were going to blame Matt and I just needed to stay quiet, I said thank you." The silence that followed wasn't just the absence of sound. It was the entire world pausing, holding its breath. The distant beeping of machines and the occasional muffled nurse's voice seemed impossibly loud. Mom stared at Ryan as if he had just begun speaking an unknown, alien tongue. "What are you talking about? That's absurd. Matthew told us he did it." "No, I didn't," I finally spoke, the sound of my own voice rusty and unfamiliar after so many years of silence. "I stopped talking. I stopped fighting the second I realized you would rather destroy one son's reputation than risk inconvenience for the other. I realized the truth was irrelevant." "Your comfort was the only goal," Ryan continued, his face glistening with tears, but his eyes locked on our mother. "I was drunk. I ruined his car. I let him take the heat for everything. The zucchini garden, that was me. The thousands of dollars missing from the emergency fund last year. I needed cash fast, and I used Dad's card, then told you Matt must have accidentally double paid his tuition or something ridiculous, and you believed it. Every single time, because you wanted to. The revelation wasn't a satisfying punch of vindication. It was a slow, sickening realization of how deeply rooted the lie had become, how easily they had discarded me. It took years, decades even, of my slow, deliberate self-destruction for them to maintain the perfect image of their golden child. Mom didn't get angry. She didn't weep dramatically. She looked at Ryan and then at me, and her face crumbled into an expression I had never seen. Utter, desolate comprehension. It was the look of someone watching their entire constructed reality burn to ash. For the first time, she saw the sheer, monstrous unfairness of what they had done. "Ryan," she whispered, her voice barely audible. You let him?" "I didn't let him, Mom," Ryan said, wiping his face roughly. "You shoved him in front of the train, and I stepped back. Every time. You created this dynamic. I just benefited from it." This was the moment. This was the raw, unedited footage of the truth finally being exposed, not by my insistence, but by the collapse of the favored one's conscience. And as the dust settled, the deep, dark sadness I felt wasn't directed at Ryan. He was just a product of their bias. My sorrow was for the small, confused boy who had internalized the idea that he deserved constant punishment. Dad survived the surgery, thank God, but the atmosphere in that house when I visited was permanently altered. The foundation had been ripped out. Mom tried to apologize. She stumbled over the words. I was so scared for Ryan's future. He was so bright. We needed him to succeed. It was a devastating non-apology, one that admitted the mechanism but didn't truly recognize the damage. She hadn't been protecting Ryan from consequence. She had been protecting her own perfect image of him, regardless of the emotional collateral required, which just happened to be my entire sense of self-worth.
The realization that followed that hospital room confession wasn't a happy ending. It was the start of a grueling, necessary separation. It took me months to process that the things I hated about myself, my hesitation, my constant self-doubt, my expectation of failure, were not inherent flaws. They were implanted memories, scars left by the shrapnel of blame.
I had always wondered why I struggled so much to accept praise, why I always waited for the other shoe to drop in my relationships. It was because the loudest voice in my head was still my mother's, accusing me of wrecking something I hadn't even touched. The family narrative didn't flip overnight. There were awkward attempts at reparations, desperate attempts to rewrite history. Ryan struggled to live up to the newfound expectations of honesty. But for me, the damage was done, and the most important change was internal. The truth finally gave me permission to mourn the childhood I never had, the support I never received, and the years I spent believing I was the problem. It allowed me to look at the garden, the car crash, the financial shortfalls, and see clearly it was never about me. It was about their comfort, their convenience, and their unwillingness to face the imperfections of their favorite. And if you're listening to this, and you're the one who always gets the blame, the one who carries the family dysfunction on your back, hear this. You are not defective. You are not clumsy or careless or unworthy. You are the structural support for a flawed narrative that other people built because it was easier than facing their own truth. Your silence is understandable, but your voice is the only thing that can break the cycle. Don't wait 25 years for someone else to confess your innocence. You already know your truth. Start living like it. You are owed that much. Now, if this resonated with you, if you have ever been the Matthew in your own family, please share your experience in the comments below. Let's create a space where the scapegoats can finally put down the stones they were forced to carry. Like and subscribe if you want to keep hearing stories of liberation and recovery from family narratives. And join me next week as we discuss the complex grief that follows the realization of systemic injustice.